Sometimes the things we save end up saving us right back. In the Wyoming mountains, a man named Caleb, who'd chosen silence over society, finds two half-frozen dogs dying in the snow. He carries them home through the storm and nurses them back to life in his small cabin. For the first time in years, Caleb isn't alone. But when word reaches the settlement below, a stranger arrives claiming the dogs are his. The man who shows up isn't just any traveler, he's connected to a past Caleb thought he'd left behind forever. What happens when saving two innocent lives brings your whole world crashing down? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at 8,000 feet, tucked into a grove of lodgepole pines, where the wind couldn't reach it quite so hard. Caleb had built it himself 5 years back, when he first came to these mountains with nothing but a mule, his rifle, and a need to disappear. The structure was solid 12 by 16 feet of notched logs chinked with clay and moss, a stone fireplace that drew clean, and a roof that shed snow like water off a duck's back. Small windows faced east and south to catch what sun the high country allowed. It wasn't much, but it was his, and it was enough. He rose before dawn most mornings, the habit of a lifetime that wouldn't break just because there was no one to answer to anymore. The routine was simple, almost meditative. Start the fire from the banked coals, melt snow for coffee and washing. Check the weather through the eastern window today. It was clear, stars still visible, the kind of cold that made your breath freeze in your beard. Eat a breakfast of cornmeal mush and salt pork, then out to the work of the day. Winter work was trapline work. Caleb ran a circuit of 30 traps through the high valleys and along the creek bottoms, checking them every 3 days. Marten, fox, beaver, when he could get them. The pelts brought good money down in the settlement, enough to buy flour, coffee, ammunition, the few things he couldn't make or do without. He was good at it, the way he'd been good at everything that required patience, silence, and careful observation. The mountains suited him. They asked nothing except respect and attention. They didn't care who he'd been or what he'd done. A man could lose himself up here, become just another creature moving through the timber, taking what he needed, leaving barely a trace. That's what Caleb had wanted when he came to become invisible, to let the man he'd been fade away like morning mist. But 5 years was a long time to be alone with your thoughts. He'd been a different person once. Captain Caleb Morrison, 3rd Regiment, Union sharpshooters. He'd killed 27 men that he could confirm, probably more he couldn't. Each shot deliberate, necessary, done in service of something he'd believed in. The war had made him good at killing and terrible at everything else. When it ended, he tried to go back to regular life, to be the man he was before, but that man was gone. The final break came when he witnessed something he couldn't ignore. Officers in his own army, men he was supposed to respect, stealing supplies and selling them to Confederate agents, still operating in the chaos after Appomattox. He'd reported it through the proper channels, trusting in the system, in honor and justice. That trust had nearly killed him. The officers had connections, money, family power. They'd turned the accusation around, produced forged documents, paid witnesses. Suddenly, Caleb was the one under investigation for desertion, for theft, for collaboration. He saw which way the wind was blowing and he ran. Stole away in the night like the deserter they claimed he was, headed west where the territories were still wild enough to swallow a man whole. Now he was Silent Cal to the few folks who knew him in the settlement below. The mountain man who came down 4, maybe 5 times a year for supplies, paid in cash or pelts, and didn't talk much. They respected that up here. The West was full of men running from something. Nobody asked too many questions. The settlement was called Timber Creek, population maybe 60 souls depending on the season. It had a trading post run by a widow named Martha Henley, a blacksmith, a small assay office, and a scattering of cabins and tents where miners and trappers wintered over. The nearest real town was 3 days' ride south. A territorial marshal came through twice a year if the weather held. The railroad was coming, folks said, but it hadn't arrived yet, and maybe it never would. Caleb knew a few people there well enough to nod to. Martha was kind in that practical frontier way. She'd extend credit if you needed it, and never mentioned it again once you paid. Old Henrik, a Norwegian trapper who'd been in these mountains since before the war, sometimes shared a pipe with Caleb and told stories in his thick accent about the old days when beaver were everywhere, and a man could get rich if he was smart and lucky. But Caleb kept his distance. Friendship meant vulnerability, meant people asking questions, getting curious. It meant caring about someone, and caring meant pain when you lost them. He'd learned that lesson too many times. Still, there were moments when the silence got heavy. Winter nights when the wind howled and the darkness pressed in, and he'd sit by the fire wondering if this was all there was. Just survival. Just existence. Just waiting for time to pass until it was over. He'd think about the men he'd served with, most of them dead now, about the life he might have had if things had been different, about whether running away had been courage or cowardice. Those were the hard nights. But come morning, there was always work to do, and work kept the darkness at bay. The tin daguerreotype was hidden in a leather pouch at the bottom of his trunk, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the moisture out. He didn't look at it often, maybe once a year, if that. It showed a younger man in a Union officer's uniform, clean-shaven, eyes hard but not yet empty. Captain Morrison. The War Department had commissioned it after a particularly successful campaign. He was supposed to be proud of it. He hadn't looked at it in over a year. Today was a trapline day. Caleb dressed in Leia's wool Union suit, flannel shirt, buckskin jacket, heavy canvas coat, wool socks, and thick-soled boots he'd made himself from elk hide, a fur hat with ear flaps, gloves lined with rabbit fur. The cold up here didn't forgive carelessness. He loaded his pack rope, extra traps, a skinning knife, fire-starting kit, jerky and hardtack in case he got delayed. The rifle went across his back, a Sharps, .50 caliber, the same model he'd used in the war. He could hit a man-sized target at 600 yards with it, though these days he mostly shot deer and elk for meat. The dogs would have been good company on days like this. The thought surprised him. He didn't have dogs, had never considered it. Dogs needed care, attention. They tied you down. But sometimes when he was out checking traps, the silence was so complete it felt like the world had ended and he was the only thing left alive. A dog would break that silence, give him something to talk to, even if it didn't answer back. He pushed the thought away and headed out into the cold. The trapline took him north along a creek that ran through a narrow valley, then up over a ridge and down into a basin where the beaver ponds were. 3 hours out, 3 hours back, plus time to check and reset the traps. If the weather held, he'd be home by mid-afternoon. The snow was deep but crusted over, firm enough to walk on with snowshoes. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only got in the high mountains, so clear and hard it almost hurt to look at. His breath plumed white in the air. The only sounds were the crunch of his snowshoes and the occasional crack of a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice. Peaceful. That's what he told himself. This was peace. By noon he'd checked 18 traps, 2 martens, good pelts. A fox that had frozen solid in the trap, he'd have to thaw it carefully to get the pelt off without damage. The rest were empty or had caught nothing useful. He reset them all, working with practiced efficiency, even in the cold. He was heading toward the last set of traps, up near the ridgeline, when the weather changed. It happened fast, the way it did in the mountains. 1 minute the sky was clear, the next a dark line of clouds was rolling in from the northwest. The wind picked up, shifting direction, bringing the smell of snow. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. Caleb checked the sky and swore quietly. This wasn't just a squall. This was going to be a real storm, the kind that could dump 3 feet in a night and leave you trapped for days. He should turn back now. Get home while he still could. But those last traps were expensive, and if the storm lasted several days, any animal caught in them would be lost to scavengers or freezing. It was poor stewardship to waste like that. He had maybe an hour before the storm hit in earnest. He could make it if he hurried. He pushed on, moving faster now, keeping one eye on the darkening sky. That decision to check those last few traps instead of turning for home would change everything. The first flakes started falling as Caleb reached the ridgeline, big, soft flakes that meant heavy snow to come. The wind was picking up too, that steady push from the northwest that could blow for days once it got started. He checked the first trap empty and moved quickly to the second. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it under the rising wind. A whimper, maybe, or just the wind playing tricks. He stopped, listening hard the way he'd learned to listen in the war, filtering out the noise to catch what didn't belong. There it was again, definitely not wind. Caleb followed the sound off the main trail, pushing through deeper snow. 50 yards into the trees, he found them. 2 dogs, half buried in a drift against a fallen log. They were barely moving, so covered in snow and ice they looked like part of the landscape. One was larger, dark-coated, the other smaller and lighter-colored. Both were shaking, that full-body tremor that meant they were past cold and into the early stages of freezing to death. For a moment Caleb just stared. Dogs, this far up in winter. It made no sense. There were no settlements within 20 miles, no hunting camps, nothing. How had they gotten here? And, more importantly, how long had they been here? The larger dog lifted its head slightly, looking at him with eyes that held no hope, just a dull acceptance. The smaller one didn't move at all. Caleb made his decision in a heartbeat. He dropped his pack and moved to them, brushing away the snow with his gloved hands. They were thin under their coats, ribs showing. The larger dog tried to growl, a protective instinct even in extremis, but it came out as barely a whisper. The smaller one's breathing was shallow, erratic. He checked them quickly, efficiently. Frostbite on their paws, certainly. Possible hypothermia. The smaller dog was in worse shape, barely responsive. They needed warmth, and they needed it now. The storm was coming harder. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way the light was fading, though it was barely past noon. Getting them home wasn't going to be easy. Caleb pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped the smaller dog in it, bundling the animal against his chest. The dog was so cold it felt like holding a block of ice. He secured it with rope, making a sling that would keep it close to his body heat. The larger dog he coaxed to its feet. It could barely stand, legs shaking, but it was conscious enough to try. "Come on," Caleb said quietly. "It's not far. You can make it." The dog looked at him with those dark, defeated eyes. Caleb started walking, pulling the larger dog along by a makeshift lead he'd tied to its frozen collar. Every few steps the animal would stumble, and he'd have to stop, wait for it to gather strength, then continue. The smaller dog against his chest wasn't moving much. He could feel its heartbeat through the coat, fast and irregular. The storm hit in full force 20 minutes into the journey home. The wind came screaming down from the peaks, driving snow horizontal, turning the world white. Visibility dropped to 10 feet, then 5. The temperature plummeted. Caleb bent his head against the blast and kept moving, navigating by instinct and a lifetime of reading terrain. He knew these mountains, knew the way home, even in whiteout conditions, but it was slow going. The larger dog fell 3 times. Each time Caleb had to stop and lift it, half carrying it until it could find its feet again. His arms burned with the effort. The smaller dog had gone completely still against his chest, and he couldn't tell if it was still breathing. He thought about leaving them. The practical part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through the war and 5 years in the wilderness, told him he was risking his own life for two animals that might already be dead. He could leave them here, cache them in the snow, come back for them if the storm cleared. But he didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the way the larger dog kept trying to stand, even when it couldn't. Maybe it was just that he'd spent 5 years saving nothing and no one, and something in him was tired of that version of himself. He pushed on. The journey took 3 hours. It should have taken 1. By the time Caleb saw the dark shape of his cabin through the snow, his entire body was numb with cold and effort. He got the larger dog through the door first, then went back for his pack and rifle he'd dropped in the snow outside. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. Caleb got it built back up, working with numb fingers, cursing quietly when the kindling wouldn't catch. Finally, flames. He added larger wood, built it hot. Then he turned to the dogs. The smaller one first. It was in the worst shape. He unwrapped it from his coat and laid it close to the fire, on a blanket. The dog was unconscious, breathing so shallow he had to put his hand on its ribs to feel it. A female, he noted absently. Young, maybe 2 years old. Some kind of shepherd mix, with a thick coat matted with ice. He worked systematically, the way he'd been trained to treat wounded men in the field. Warm the core first. He rubbed her body gently, trying to get circulation going without damaging frozen tissue. He warmed water and used a cloth to clean the ice from her paws, her ears, her face. The paw pads were frostbitten, black in places. She'd likely lose a few toes, but maybe not the whole foot if he was careful. He made a warm mash of cornmeal and a little salt pork fat, thin enough to swallow. Carefully, he got small amounts into her mouth, massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. The larger dog was in better shape, a male, also young, also some kind of shepherd or cattle dog mix. He was conscious, watching Caleb with wary eyes, shivering violently. Caleb went through the same process, warming, cleaning, checking for frostbite. This one's paws were in better condition, though still damaged. He got more of the warm mash into this dog, and the animal ate it hungrily once he understood what was being offered. For the next 6 hours, Caleb barely moved from their side. He kept the fire roaring hot, kept warming cloths and wrapping their paws, kept trying to get food and water into them. The storm hammered the cabin, wind shrieking through the eaves, snow piling against the walls. Inside, the small space was warm and bright with firelight. Around midnight, the smaller dog opened her eyes. Caleb had been dozing in his chair, exhausted from the day's efforts. He woke to find her looking at him, those soft brown eyes confused but aware. Her tail moved slightly, just a twitch, but it was movement. "Hey there," Caleb said quietly. "You made it." The tail twitched again. Something happened in Caleb's chest, something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Relief, yes, but more than that. Connection, purpose, the sense that he'd done something that mattered. He reached out slowly, and the dog didn't flinch. He touched her head gently, scratched behind her ears. She leaned into the touch, just slightly, and closed her eyes. The larger dog was watching this interaction carefully. When Caleb turned to him, the wariness was still there, but less pronounced. Caleb held out his hand, let the dog sniff it, then offered the same gentle scratch. "You two are tough," Caleb said. "Don't know how you ended up out there, but you fought hard to live. That counts for something." Over the next 3 days, while the storm raged outside, Caleb nursed them back from the edge. He learned their rhythms, their personalities. The male was bold, protective of the female, always placing himself between her and any perceived threat, even though Caleb was the only thing around to threaten them. The female was gentler, more trusting, quicker to accept comfort and affection. He started calling them by names on the second day, though he told himself it was just practical, just easier than saying the big one and the small one. The male he called Dakota, after the territories to the north. The female he called Birch, for the white patch on her chest that reminded him of birch bark. By the fourth day, when the storm finally broke and pale sunlight streamed through the windows, both dogs were on their feet. They'd lost the tips of several toes to frostbite, and they were still thin and weak, but they were alive. They were going to make it. Dakota and Birch. His dogs. Except they weren't his dogs. Someone had put collars on them, had cared for them once. Someone might be looking for them. The right thing to do was to report the find, to try to locate the owner. Caleb knew this. He'd always tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him. But as he sat by the fire that evening, a dog on either side of him, their warmth against his legs, their soft breathing the only sound in the cabin, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just this once, the right thing and the thing he wanted would turn out to be the same. He carved a small whistle from a piece of birch wood that week, teaching the dogs to come when called. It gave him something to do with his hands, and it gave them structure, something to respond to. They learned quickly, eager to please, grateful in the way that animals could be when they'd been saved from death. For the first time in 5 years, Caleb's cabin didn't feel empty. For the first time in 5 years, he didn't feel alone. That feeling should have been warning enough. Nothing good in his life had ever lasted. He should have known better than to get attached. But he was tired of knowing better, tired of keeping himself separate from everything and everyone. So when the time came to make his next supply run to the settlement, 2 weeks after finding the dogs, Caleb made a choice. He'd mention them to Martha, casually. See if anyone had reported dogs missing. Do his due diligence. But in his heart, he was already hoping the answer would be no. The dogs were his now. They'd chosen each other in that storm. That had to mean something. He was wrong, of course. It meant everything, just not in the way he thought. The rider came on the 9th day, just after noon when the sun was high and the snow glittered like diamonds across the meadow. Caleb saw him from a quarter-mile out, a dark figure on horseback, moving steadily up the trail toward the cabin. His heart sank and hardened at the same time. Inside, he told the dogs quietly. They obeyed immediately, moving into the cabin. Caleb followed, leaving the door cracked so he could watch. Dakota pressed against his leg, alert and tense. Birch whined softly, picking up on his tension. The rider was well-dressed, Caleb noted. Good wool coat, quality hat, horse that looked like it had cost more than most men made in a year. He sat straight in the saddle, confident, like a man accustomed to respect and getting his way. When the rider was close enough, Caleb stepped outside, rifle held casually but present, not threatening, just there. A mountain man with his rifle was like a carpenter with his hammer, so common as to be unremarkable, but the message was clear anyway. The man reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin. Up close, Caleb could see he was probably in his 40s, clean-shaven, with the kind of soft hands that came from never doing hard labor. There was something about his eyes, though sharp, calculating, the eyes of a man always thinking 3 moves ahead. "Mr. Morrison?" the man called out. "That's right, Thomas Ashford." He dismounted smoothly, tied his horse to a pine branch, and approached with his hand extended. "I appreciate you sending word about the dogs." Caleb shook his hand briefly. The grip was firm enough but lacked the calluses of real work. "They're inside, recovering. May I see them?" Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Come on." He led Ashford into the cabin, watching the man's reaction carefully. The dogs were sitting near the fire, exactly where Caleb had told them to stay. When Ashford entered, Dakota's ears went back slightly, not aggressive, but wary. Birch stood up, tail lowered, watching the stranger with clear uncertainty. Neither dog showed any sign of recognition. "There they are," Ashford said, but there was something off in his voice. Relief, certainly, but it felt performed somehow, like an actor hitting his mark. "I've been searching for weeks." "They didn't come to you," Caleb observed quietly. "They've been through trauma, probably don't recognize me right away." Ashford took a step toward them. Dakota's lip curled slightly, a warning. Easy there. It's me. But it wasn't the greeting of a dog seeing its owner, it was the wariness of a dog facing a stranger. Why don't you sit? Caleb suggested. Tell me what happened, how you lost them. Ashford glanced at him, seemed to measure something, then nodded. Of course. He took a seat at the table. Caleb remained standing, positioned between Ashford and the dogs. I bought them in St. Louis, Ashford began. 2 fine shepherds, or that's what the seller claimed. I was traveling west to work some mining claims I've invested in. Had them with me on the journey, thought they'd be good company and protection. Long journey from St. Louis. Yes, well, I took my time, stopped in various settlements. He accepted the coffee Caleb offered. About 3 weeks ago, we were camped not far from here, maybe 10 miles south. There was a wolf pack in the area. We could hear them at night. One evening the dogs spooked, broke their leads and ran. I searched for 2 days but found nothing. The wolves, the cold, I assumed the worst. It was a plausible story. But Caleb had been reading men for lies since the war, and something about Ashford's delivery was too smooth, too rehearsed. What did you call them? Caleb asked. I'm sorry? Their names. What did you call them? A flicker of something crossed Ashford's face, too quick to identify. Duke and Lady. The male was Duke, the female Lady. Caleb looked at the dogs. Duke. Neither dog moved. They watched him, waiting for the commands they actually knew, the names they'd learned. Dakota, Birch. Like I said, Ashford interjected smoothly. Trauma. They might not respond right away. These dogs respond to training just fine. They know their names, just not those ones. The temperature in the room dropped a degree. Ashford's pleasant expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened slightly. Are you suggesting I'm lying about my own property, Mr. Morrison? I'm suggesting the dogs don't know you. That's just a fact. Dogs can forget. It's been 3 weeks in harsh conditions. Dogs don't forget their owners in 3 weeks, not when those owners treated them right. Ashford set down his coffee cup carefully. I have papers. A bill of sale from St. Louis, legal proof of ownership. I'd like to see them. From inside his coat, Ashford produced a folded document. Caleb took it, read it over. It was a bill of sale, dated 2 months prior, from a merchant in St. Louis. Description: 2 shepherd dogs, young male and female. Price: $30. The description was generic enough to match almost any pair of similar dogs. No specific markings mentioned, no individual characteristics. Just shepherd dogs, young, male, and female. This could describe 100 different dogs, Caleb said. But it describes these dogs, and its legal documentation of ownership. Ashford's voice had taken on an edge. Unless you have some reason to believe otherwise? Caleb looked at the dogs again. Dakota was standing now, positioning himself slightly in front of Birch, protective. Both animals were focused on Ashford with clear wariness. Not hostility exactly, but the kind of careful distance animals kept from potential threats. Tell me about their habits, Caleb said. What they like to eat, how they behave, their training. Ashford's jaw tightened. I'm not sure what you're implying. Just making conversation. You owned these dogs for 2 months, traveled with them. You must know them pretty well. They're hunting dogs, Ashford said. Good noses, strong build. They ate standard fair grain meat scraps. They were trained to follow and to guard. But Dakota and Birch showed none of the behaviors of hunting dogs. They hadn't shown any interest in Caleb's game, hadn't tried to track or chase. They were companion animals, protective certainly, but not hunters. Hunting dogs, Caleb repeated flatly. That's what I said. Caleb reached down and scratched Birch's ears. She leaned into his hand, comfortable, trusting. These aren't hunting dogs. They're too gentle, too people-focused. Whoever raised them did it for companionship, not work. Are you calling me a liar? Ashford's pleasant facade was cracking now, anger seeping through. I'm saying your story doesn't match the dogs I've been living with. Ashford stood. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your care for these animals, and I'm willing to compensate you generously for your time and effort. $50. That's more than fair for 2 weeks of feeding them. They're not for sale. They're not yours to sell, they're mine. Ashford pulled out a leather wallet, counted out bills. $50, last offer. Caleb didn't move, didn't reach for the money. And if I don't accept, then we have a legal dispute. I have documentation. You have what? Your word that the dogs don't seem to recognize me? That won't hold up anywhere. They're my property, legally purchased, and you're obligated to return them. It was the argument Caleb had feared. Property law was clear, and possession with documentation usually won. But something in Ashford's insistence, in the way he kept emphasizing the legal aspect rather than any emotional connection to the dogs, made Caleb's instincts scream. Then Caleb noticed something. On Ashford's coat, partially hidden by his scarf, was a pin. A military insignia. Silver cavalry, officer grade. You served, Caleb said, nodding toward it. Ashford's hand moved to the pin reflexively. I did. Supply Corps captain, why? Just curious. I served too. Something shifted in Ashford's expression, recognition maybe, or calculation. Did you now? What unit? 3rd Regiment. Union sharpshooters. A sharpshooter. Ashford studied him with new interest. You must be quite skilled. I did my job. I'm sure you did. Ashford's tone had changed, become almost friendly again. But there was something underneath it now, something knowing. The war was a long time ago. Different times, different rules. Some rules don't change. Honor, honesty, taking care of what's entrusted to you. Indeed. Which is why I'm sure you'll do the honorable thing and return my property. Ashford moved toward the door, confident now. I'll be staying at the mining camp south of here for the next few days. That should give the dogs time to adjust to seeing me again. I'll come back in 3 days to collect them. Surely by then they'll remember. He was at the door when he turned back, and in that moment Caleb saw something in his eyes that made his blood run cold. Recognition, knowledge. Ashford knew something, had figured something out. You know, Ashford said casually, I thought the name Morrison sounded familiar. Then I remembered there was a Captain Caleb Morrison, sharpshooter, who disappeared after the war. Under rather unfortunate circumstances, if I recall. Something about accusations of desertion and theft. Caleb went very still. But that couldn't be you, could it? Ashford smiled, thin and predatory. That Morrison is wanted, has a price on his head. Would be in a great deal of trouble if the authorities found him, whereas you're just a simple mountain man. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. The name. The threat was clear, delivered with a smile. Caleb felt the walls closing in, the past catching up the way it always did. 3 days, Mr. Morrison. Think carefully about what you want to do. Ashford tipped his hat. I'll see you then. He walked out into the bright snow, mounted his horse, and rode away without looking back. Caleb stood in the doorway watching him go, his mind racing. This wasn't about dogs. It had never been about dogs. Ashford knew who he was. And that changed everything. Behind him, Dakota whined softly. Caleb turned to see both dogs watching him with concern, sensing his distress. He knelt, and they came to him immediately, pressing close, offering the only comfort they could. He buried his face in Dakota's fur, breathing deep, trying to think. 3 days. 3 days to figure out what Thomas Ashford really wanted, and why he'd gone to all this trouble to find a man who'd been hiding for 5 years. The dogs weren't the point. They never had been. They were the bait. That night, Caleb barely slept. He sat by the fire, his rifle across his knees, thinking through everything that had happened. Ashford had recognized his name. But more than that, he'd known about the accusations, the warrant, the circumstances of Caleb's disappearance. That wasn't common knowledge. The war had been over for years, and most people had forgotten about one disgraced captain among thousands of discharged soldiers, unless someone had been specifically looking into it. The pieces started coming together in Caleb's mind, and the picture they formed was darker than he'd imagined. The next morning, he made a decision. He couldn't just sit here waiting for Ashford to make his move. He needed information, needed to understand what he was really dealing with. He headed down to the settlement again, leaving the dogs secured in the cabin with enough food and water for the day. It was a risk leaving them, but he needed to be able to move quickly, and he needed to talk to people who might know something about Thomas Ashford. Martha was behind her counter when Caleb arrived, and her expression tightened with concern the moment she saw his face. What happened? Ashford came yesterday, and the dogs didn't know him. Not a flicker of recognition. He's lying about them being his. Martha nodded slowly. I wondered about that. What did he say? He pushed the legal angle. Has papers saying he bought 2 shepherd dogs in Street Louis. Generic enough to be any dogs. Then Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. He recognized my name, knew about the accusations from the war. Martha's eyes widened. Oh, Caleb. I need to know more about him, who he is, what he's doing here. You said he mentioned mining claims. That's what he told me, working with some company that's been buying up land around here. There's been rumors of silver in the high country. She pulled out her ledger, flipped through pages. He's been in the area for about a month, maybe longer. Stays at the camp, comes into town occasionally for supplies. Who runs that camp? Man named Wheeler. Bill Wheeler. Not a good sort if you ask me. He and his crew have been pushing out small claim holders, buying land for cheap, or just taking it when folks can't prove proper ownership. She looked up at Caleb. You think Ashford's involved in that? I think he's involved in something, and the dogs were just a way to get to me. But why you? That was the question Caleb had been asking himself all night. I don't know yet, but I need to find out before he comes back in 3 days. Martha was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. Henrik's due back today. He's been trapping up near where that mining camp is. He might have seen something, heard something, and there's someone else you should talk to. The door opened, and a younger man walked in, bundled against the cold. He was maybe 30, with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors, but the sharp eyes of someone who paid attention to details. Speak of the devil, Martha said. Caleb, this is James Cord. He's with the Territorial Marshal's office, just passing through. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but he forced himself to stay calm. A marshal. Of all the timing. Cord noticed the reaction and raised his hand slightly, non-threatening. Easy there. I'm not here for you, Mr. Morrison, unless you've been causing trouble I don't know about. Just passing through yourself? Caleb asked carefully. Actually investigating some claims of fraud up at the Wheeler mining operation. Heard some interesting stories about land purchases that don't quite add up. Cord moved to the stove, warming his hands. You wouldn't happen to know anything about a Thomas Ashford, would you? Caleb and Martha exchanged glances. Why do you ask? Because his name keeps coming up in connection with Wheeler. They're business partners, near as I can tell. Been working together to acquire land in this area. Some of it legally, some of it well. That's what I'm here to look into. Caleb's mind raced. Ashford was a partner in the mining operation, which meant this was about land, about money. But how did a wanted man hiding in the mountains fit into a mining scheme? Unless... You have land up in the high country, don't you? Cord asked. Filed a claim about 5 years back? I do. Under what name? This was dangerous ground. If Cord knew about the warrant, but the marshal was looking at him steadily, not reaching for weapons, not moving like a man about to make an arrest. My own name, Caleb said finally. Caleb Morrison. Cord nodded. Thought so. See, I've been doing some digging into the Morrison case, the desertion and theft charges. You know what I found? Caleb's heart was pounding. What? That. They were bullshit. Pardon my language, Martha. Cord leaned against the counter. The officers who accused you, 3 of them. All dead now, past 2 years. But before they died, one of them, fellow named Patterson, he got religion on his deathbed, confessed to a priest about the whole scheme. Stealing army supplies, selling them, framing you when you tried to report it. The room seemed to tilt. What? The priest reported it to the War Department. They investigated, quietly, found evidence Patterson was telling the truth. The charges against you were dismissed 6 months ago. You're a free man, Morrison, have been for half a year. You just didn't know it. Tucked away up here in the mountains. Caleb sat down heavily. Free. He'd been free for 6 months and hadn't known it. All that time, all that fear, for nothing. But that's not all, Cord continued. See, one of those officers who accused you? His name was Richard Ashford, Thomas Ashford's father. Everything clicked into place. Thomas knows I was exonerated. Probably. The dismissal wasn't exactly publicized, but it's in the official records. Anyone looking would find it. So why come after me now? Cord pulled out a map, spread it on the counter. He pointed to an area in the high country. Yeah, and this, he pointed to several parcels nearby, is land Wheeler and Ashford have been acquiring. They've been buying up everything in this area, everything except yours. Martha leaned over the map. Why would they want Caleb's land so badly? Because, according to a recent geological survey, that whole area is sitting on one of the richest silver deposits in the territory. The Mother Lode runs right through Morrison's claim. His land is the key to the whole operation. Caleb stared at the map. I didn't know there was silver, neither did most people. But Ashford's company paid for that survey, knew what was there. They've been systematically acquiring all the surrounding land. Yours is the last piece they need. So the dogs were bait, Cord confirmed. He didn't lose them. He left them there deliberately, knowing someone would find them, knowing the story would spread in a small community like this. When he heard you'd found them, he knew exactly who you were and where you were. The whole thing was designed to give him leverage. But I've been exonerated. He doesn't have leverage anymore. Does he know that you know that? Cord asked. Because if he thinks you still believe you're wanted, then he still has that threat to hold over you. Martha spoke up quietly. He came yesterday, threatened to report Caleb's location, unless what, Caleb? What did he ask for? He didn't ask directly, just said he'd be back in 3 days for the dogs. He's going to ask for your land, Cord said, probably offer to keep quiet about your location in exchange for signing over your claim. Classic coercion. But if I'm already cleared, he doesn't know that you know that. And even if you tell him, he might not believe you. Or he might have a backup plan. Men like Ashford always have a backup plan. Cord rolled up the map, which is why I need to ask, when he comes back in 3 days, will you help me? Help you how? Let him make his pitch. Get him to state his demands clearly. Threaten you, explicitly. I'll be there, hidden, as witness. Then we arrest him for extortion, fraud, and whatever else we can make stick. Caleb looked at the marshal for a long moment. His whole life, the system had failed him. The law had branded him a criminal for trying to do the right thing. And now this marshal was asking him to trust the system again. But Cord had done his homework. He'd found the truth about the false charges. He was here investigating corruption, trying to stop men like Ashford from stealing land and lives. Maybe the system could work. Sometimes. With the right people. What about the dogs? Caleb asked. What about them? They're not his. He left them to die. I want to make sure he can't take them. Cord smiled slightly. Well, abandoning animals in the wilderness is technically a crime. We can add that to the charges. And as for ownership, if he can't prove those specific dogs are the ones on his bill of sale, and if you've been caring for them in good faith, I'd say you have as strong a claim as anyone. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope. All right, Caleb said. I'll do it, but on one condition. What's that? Those dogs stay with me. No matter what happens, they don't go to him. Cord extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, and for the first time in 5 years, Caleb felt something he'd almost forgotten. He felt like maybe, just maybe, justice was possible after all. The 2 days before Ashford's return passed in tense preparation. Marshal Cord came up to the cabin to scout positions and plan the operation. They agreed he'd hide in the small storage shed behind the cabin, close enough to hear everything but out of sight. Caleb would engage Ashford, let him make his demands, get everything on record. Don't be a hero, Cord warned. Just let him talk. Men like this love to hear themselves explain how clever they are. Give him rope and he'll hang himself with it. Caleb spent the time working with the dogs, teaching them to stay quiet on command. The last thing they needed was Dakota growling at the wrong moment and spooking Ashford before they had what they needed. Both dogs learned quickly, sensing the importance even if they didn't understand the specifics. On the morning of the 3rd day, Cord arrived early and took his position. Caleb waited inside the cabin, the dogs at his feet, trying to keep his breathing steady. This was it. Either they'd get Ashford to incriminate himself, or this whole plan would fall apart and Caleb would be right back where he started. Worse, actually, because if Ashford suspected a trap, he'd disappear, and the mining scheme would just continue under someone else's name. Noon came and went, then 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. At 3, Caleb heard hoofbeats. But it wasn't 1 horse, it was 3. Through the window, Caleb saw Ashford riding up the trail, flanked by 2 other men, rough-looking types, the kind hired for muscle rather than intelligence. One had a rifle across his saddle, the other wore a pistol on his hip, positioned for a quick draw. This wasn't the plan. Cord had expected Ashford to come alone, confident in his leverage. Bringing hired guns changed the equation entirely. Caleb caught a glimpse of movement from the shed. Cord had seen them too. Caleb gave the smallest nod. Proceed. They had to proceed. He stepped outside, rifle in hand but pointed down. Casual, unthreatening. Mr. Ashford, you brought friends. Ashford dismounted, his 2 companions staying in their saddles. Insurance, Mr. Morrison. These are dangerous mountains. A man can't be too careful. Seems like a lot of insurance for collecting 2 dogs. Well, that depends on whether you're going to be reasonable about this. Ashford's smile didn't reach his eyes. Have you given my offer some thought? The $50? That seemed like you were just paying for the dog's care. Indeed, but I'm prepared to be more generous given the circumstances. Ashford pulled a document from his coat. I've taken the liberty of drawing up a simple contract. You sign over your land claim to me, and in exchange, I forget I ever heard the name Caleb Morrison. I forget about certain outstanding warrants. Everyone goes their separate ways. No trouble. There it was. The explicit demand. Caleb hoped Cord was getting all this. That's quite an offer. But I'm curious. Why do you want my land so badly? Does it matter? It does to me. Ashford shrugged. The mining company I work with wants to consolidate holdings in this area. Your claim sits in the middle of our operations. It's inconvenient. Inconvenient, Caleb repeated. Must be pretty valuable land to go to all this trouble. Something flickered in Ashford's expression, annoyance, perhaps, that Caleb was questioning rather than just signing. The value is my concern. Your concern should be staying out of federal prison. Or worse. Worse? Deserters hang, Mr. Morrison, even years after the fact. The army has a long memory for that sort of thing. Caleb kept his expression neutral. And you'd report me? If you force my hand, yes. But it doesn't have to come to that. Sign the paper, take your dogs, disappear even deeper into the mountains if you want. Just give me the land. What if I told you those charges were dropped, that I was exonerated 6 months ago? Ashford's eyes narrowed. I'd say you were bluffing. And even if it were true, which I doubt, do you really want to test it? Want to risk the authorities taking a closer look at where you've been, what you've been doing? It was a good response, and it showed Ashford had thought this through. Even if Caleb claimed exoneration, there was enough uncertainty, enough potential for bureaucratic nightmare to make the threat work. But Caleb had one more card to play. Those dogs, he said, they weren't yours, were they? Ashford's expression hardened. I have documentation. You left them in the mountains to die. Use them as bait. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. You knew someone would find them, knew the story would spread. You were counting on it. But you didn't count on me actually caring about them, did you? Thought I'd just hand them over when you showed up with your legal papers and your threats. The dogs are irrelevant. This is about the land. No, Caleb said quietly. This is about your father. Ashford went very still. The 2 hired men shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to weapons. My father? Richard Ashford, Supply Corps captain. One of the men who accused me of desertion and theft when I reported him for corruption. One of the men who destroyed my life. The mask dropped from Ashford's face. What replaced it was cold, hard rage. My father was a good man, an honorable officer, and you were a troublemaker who couldn't leave well enough alone. Your father was a thief who sold army supplies to the enemy. My father made sure his family was taken care of. In a world that didn't pay officers what they deserved, he found a way to provide. Ashford's voice rose. And you ruined it. Your accusations started an investigation that hounded him for years. Even after they couldn't prove anything, even after they made you the scapegoat, the suspicion followed him. It destroyed his career, his reputation. He died in disgrace because of you. He died because he was corrupt. He died because you couldn't mind your own business. Ashford was shouting now, all pretense of civility gone. So yes, when I heard the Morrison name attached to a land claim sitting on top of a silver deposit worth millions, I saw an opportunity. Justice, even. You took everything from my family. Now I'm taking everything from you. The dogs were a stroke of genius, if I do say so myself. Found them in Street Louis, brought them west, left them in the high country where I knew some soft-hearted fool would find them and nurse them back. Counted on small-town gossip to spread the story. When I heard it was you who'd found them, I could hardly believe my luck. Ashford smiled, vicious, poetic really. You saved 2 worthless animals, and it costs you everything you've built here. Caleb heard a slight sound from the shed cord, probably fighting the urge to emerge early. But they needed more. They needed the threat explicit. And if I don't sign, then I report you. And if that doesn't work? Ashford nodded to his men. Accidents happen in the mountains. Cabins burn. Men disappear. One way or another, I get that land. There it was. Extortion, conspiracy, threats of violence. Everything Cord needed. But before Caleb could respond, one of the hired men spoke up. Boss, we got company. Everyone turned. Coming up the trail were 4 more horses. Henrik was in the lead, followed by 3 men Caleb didn't recognize. As they got closer, he saw they were wearing badges, territorial deputies. By the look of them, Ashford's face went white. The shed door opened, and Cord stepped out, his own badge visible, a notebook in his hand. This is the part where I arrest you, Mr. Ashford. Extortion, fraud, conspiracy to commit violence, animal cruelty. I've got quite a list worked up. You can't, I haven't done anything. I just heard you confess to abandoning 2 dogs in the wilderness with intent to let them die. I heard you threaten Mr. Morrison with false criminal charges unless he signed over his land. I heard you threaten arson and murder if he refused." Cord's voice was hard. And these gentlemen heard it too. The deputies had surrounded Ashford's hired men, who wisely kept their hands away from their weapons. "Furthermore," Cord continued, "I've been investigating your mining operation for the past month. Turns out you and Wheeler have been running quite the scheme: fraudulent land purchases, forged documents, intimidation of rightful claim holders. We've got victims willing to testify, paper trails, all of it. Your lawyers will have a hard time explaining the evidence. Oh, and Mr. Ashford, your father's deathbed confession, the one where he admitted to the supply theft and framing Captain Morrison? That's official record now. Morrison was exonerated 6 months ago, so all these threats you've been making, they were based on nothing." Ashford looked at Caleb with pure hatred. "You knew." "I found out 2 days ago," Caleb said. "Right about the time I decided to stop running from men like you and your father. You'll never work that silver claim. I'll tie it up in legal challenges for years. You'll die poor in these mountains." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but I'll die free, and I'll still have my dogs." At the mention of the dogs, Dakota and Birch emerged from the cabin where they'd been waiting. They moved to Caleb's side immediately, pressing against his legs where they belonged. Ashford stared at them with contempt. "They're just dogs." "No," Caleb said quietly. "They're the best decision I've made in 5 years." Cord's deputies moved in, securing Ashford and his men. As they led Ashford to a horse, the man was still protesting, still threatening lawsuits and consequences. But his power was broken, his scheme exposed. Henrik came over to Caleb, grinning. "Good show, my friend. Wish I could have seen his face when the marshal stepped out. How did you know to come?" "Cord sent word yesterday. Thought you might need backup just in case." Henrik scratched Dakota's ears. "These dogs brought you nothing but trouble, eh?" Caleb looked down at Dakota and Birch, who were calmly watching the proceedings as if they understood exactly what had just happened. "No, they brought me home." As the deputies prepared to take their prisoners away, Cord came over to Caleb. "You did good, kept him talking, got everything we needed. What happens now?" "Now we go through the legal process. Ashford and Wheeler will face charges. The fraudulent land deals will be reviewed and reversed where possible. And you," Cord smiled, "you get to keep your land, your freedom, and your dogs. Hell of a deal, if you ask me. The silver? That's yours too. If you want to work it, you can make a fortune. If you want to just let it sit there, that's your right as well." Caleb looked out at the mountains, at the cabin he'd built, at the life he'd carved out of the wilderness. A fortune in silver under his feet, if he wanted it. The freedom to live however he chose. But what he wanted most was already here. "I need to think about it," he said. Cord nodded. "You've earned that right." He tipped his hat. "We'll be in touch for testimony when the trial comes. Until then, welcome back to the land of the living, Captain Morrison." As the group rode away, taking Ashford and his men with them, silence settled over the clearing. Caleb stood there with the dogs, watching until they disappeared into the trees. Then he looked down at Dakota and Birch. Well, that was something. Dakota's tail wagged slightly. Birch nuzzled his hand. "Come on," Caleb said. "Let's go inside. I think we've all earned some peace and quiet." But as he turned toward the cabin, he knew the peace wouldn't last long. News of the silver would spread. People would come. The isolation he'd built over 5 years was about to end, whether he wanted it to or not. The question was, what was he going to do about it? For the first time in a long time, Caleb smiled. He'd figure it out. He always did. And this time, he wouldn't be doing it alone. 3 weeks after Ashford's arrest, Caleb stood in the trading post, listening to Martha explain why there were now 5 tents set up on the outskirts of Timber Creek. Prospectors, she said, shaking her head. Word got out about the silver on your land. They're hoping to stake claims nearby, maybe get in on the action. I haven't decided to mine it. Doesn't matter. The rumor's enough. Give it another month, and this place will be crawling with fortune seekers. She poured him coffee. You thought about what you're going to do. Caleb had thought about little else. The hidden deed to his land was secure, filed properly with the territorial office. Cord had made sure of that before he left. But legal ownership was one thing, protecting it from claim jumpers, squatters, and men willing to kill for a share of silver was another. The mountains that had hidden him for 5 years suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Henrik says, there are already people trying to work claims on the edges of my property, Caleb said, testing boundaries, seeing if I'll notice. Will you? I noticed. Martha studied him over her coffee cup. You could sell. There's already been offers, I hear. Legitimate mining companies willing to pay top dollar. You could take the money, go anywhere you want, start fresh. It was tempting. Walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Leave the mountains, the memories, all of it behind. But then he thought about his cabin, the trails he knew by heart, the rhythm of the seasons up in the high country. He thought about Dakota and Birch, who'd settled into mountain life like they were born to it. They'd saved each other, all 3 of them, in that storm. Walking away now felt like betraying that. I'm not selling, Caleb said. Then you're going to need help. Can't protect 500 acres by yourself, not with the kind of people silver attracts. I know. There's good men around here who'd work for you. Henrik, for one. He knows this country better than anyone. There's also... She hesitated. There's been former soldiers coming through, men like you, looking for a fresh start. They hear about what happened with Ashford, about how you stood up to corruption. Some of them are asking if you're hiring. Caleb turned his cup slowly on the counter. I came up here to get away from all that, from leading men, from responsibility. I know. But sometimes what we run from is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Martha's voice was gentle. You're a good leader, Caleb. You could build something here. Not just a mine, but a community. Do it right. Treat people fair. Show that there's a better way than what men like Ashford represent. It was a nice thought, but Caleb had seen too much of what men did when money was involved. Greed poisoned everything it touched. I need to think about it, he said. That night, back at the cabin, Caleb pulled out the hidden deed and studied it by firelight. The land was legally his, every acre documented and filed. But paper only meant something if he could defend it. And doing that alone was impossible. He thought about the men Martha mentioned, former soldiers looking for work, for purpose. He'd commanded men before, led them into battle, watched some of them die. The thought of taking on that responsibility again made something in his chest tighten. But the alternative was losing everything. Again. Dakota's head appeared on his knee, the dog's dark eyes questioning. Birch was curled by the fire, but her ears were up, listening. What do you think? Caleb asked them quietly. Should we trust people again? Dakota just pressed closer, solid and warm. Trust, for him, wasn't complicated. You either did or you didn't. Maybe it was that simple. Over the next week, Caleb made his decision. He'd protect his land, but he'd do it his way, with people he could trust, following principles that mattered more than profit. He hired Henrik first. The old Norwegian knew every inch of the high country and could spot trouble coming from miles away. Henrik accepted with a simple nod and a handshake. About time you stopped being so alone, my friend. Then came 3 former soldiers Martha had mentioned. 2 were Union veterans like himself. 1 had fought for the Confederacy, but the war was over, and up here what mattered was what a man could do and whether his word was good. Samuel was a quiet man from Ohio, steady and reliable. He'd been a scout in the war and could read terrain like a book. Thomas was bigger, stronger, good with his hands, and better at building things than talking. The Confederate veteran was named Jack. and he carried the weight of the war in his eyes the same way Caleb did. "We're not starting a mining operation," Caleb told them that first day, gathered around a fire outside his cabin. "Not yet, maybe not ever. Right now, we're just protecting the land from people who'd steal it. That means patrols, maintaining boundaries, making it clear this property is claimed and defended." "You expecting trouble?" Jack asked. "I'm expecting people to test us. We show them we're serious. Most will back off. The ones who don't, we deal with them legal and proper. No vigilante justice, no violence, unless absolutely necessary. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." The men nodded. They understood. They'd all seen what happened when things weren't done right. Caleb showed them the boundaries, the natural landmarks that marked his property. They set up a system of patrols and established camps at strategic points. It was like setting up a defensive perimeter, and Caleb found himself falling back into old patterns, thinking tactically, positioning resources, anticipating threats. It felt uncomfortably familiar. But also, in a way he hadn't expected, it felt right. Within 2 weeks, they had a functioning operation, not mining, protecting, and it was working. Claim jumpers who showed up found organized resistance instead of a lone mountain man. Word spread that Morrison's land was well defended, and the casual opportunists moved on to easier targets. But not everyone was casual. Henrik came back from a patrol one evening with troubling news. "There's a group setting up camp on the eastern boundary, maybe a dozen men well armed. They're not prospecting, they're building permanent structures." "On my land?" "Just inside the boundary line. I warned them off, showed them the property markers. Their boss said he doesn't recognize claim boundaries that can't be enforced." Caleb felt the old anger stir, but he pushed it down. "Who's leading them?" "Man named Sykes. Frank Sykes. I asked around, he's got a reputation, works for mining interests, specializes in acquiring land through intimidation, legal when he can be, otherwise when he has to be." Martha had mentioned Sykes. He'd been connected to Wheeler's operation, though never directly enough to be arrested with the others. "He's testing us," Samuel said, "seeing if we'll back down or fight." "We do neither," Caleb said. "We use the law. Cord left me contact information for the Territorial Marshal's office. We file a formal complaint, get them removed legally." "That could take weeks," Jack pointed out. "Meanwhile, they're on your land, digging in. Then we make them uncomfortable while we wait. Constant patrols along that boundary, visible presence, documentation of every violation. We build a legal case they can't fight." Thomas grinned. "Siege tactics. Make them regret every day they stay." It was a good plan, but Caleb knew it would only work if Sykes was playing by some kind of rules. Men who specialized in intimidation didn't always care about legal niceties. The confrontation came 3 days later. Caleb was checking the eastern boundary with Henrik when they encountered Sykes and 4 of his men. Sykes was a bull of a man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been in more than a few fights. "You, Morrison?" he asked. "I am. Heard you've been harassing my men, claiming this is all your land." "It is my land, legally filed and registered. You're trespassing." Sykes spat tobacco juice into the snow. "See, that's where we disagree. My employer has documentation showing this land was never properly claimed, which makes it open to new filing. Your employer is wrong. I can show you the deed, the registration, everything properly filed with the Territorial Office. Papers can be forged. Not these." Sykes took a step closer, using his size as intimidation. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to stop bothering my men. We're going to work our claim. And if you're smart, you'll realize there's enough silver here for everyone and we can all get along. Or..." Caleb didn't back up, didn't show any reaction to the intimidation attempt. "Or things get unpleasant. Men get hurt. Property gets damaged. The mountains can be dangerous for folks who don't know their place." Henrik shifted slightly, hand moving toward the rifle on his back, but Caleb shook his head minutely. "I've filed a formal complaint with the territorial marshal," Caleb said calmly. "They'll be here within the week to remove you and your men from my property. You can leave now peacefully, or you can leave then in chains. Your choice." Sykes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Marshal's office is understaffed and overworked. They're not coming out here for a property dispute. By the time they do, we'll be so dug in, it won't matter what your papers say." "You're wrong about that." "Am I? Tell me, Morrison, how many men you got?" 5? 6? "I've got 15, all experienced, all willing to do what's necessary. You really want to go to war over some land?" "This isn't war," Caleb said quietly. "This is property rights and the rule of law, and I'm not backing down." "Then you're a fool." Sykes turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Morrison, I heard about those dogs of yours. Nice animals. Be a shame if something happened to them. Accidents happen in these mountains." The threat against the dogs sent ice through Caleb's veins. Henrik's hand was definitely on his rifle now, but Caleb remained outwardly calm. "You go near those dogs," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet, "and we'll have a different kind of conversation." Sykes laughed. "Touched a nerve, did I? Don't worry, like I said, accidents happen, can't be blamed for accidents." After Sykes and his men left, Henrik turned to Caleb. "That was a threat. Direct threat. I know. We should move the dogs somewhere safe. Maybe down to Martha's in town." Caleb thought about Dakota and Birch, about how they'd settled into life at the cabin, how they patrolled with him and slept by the fire. Moving them would keep them physically safe, but it would also mean giving in to fear. "No," he said, "they stay with me, but we increase security, keep them close, and we make sure Sykes knows that if anything happens to them, there will be consequences." "Legal consequences?" "Every kind of consequence." That night, Caleb gathered his men and explained the situation. Sykes wasn't going to leave peacefully, and waiting for the marshal might take too long. They needed to be prepared for the possibility of violence while still maintaining the moral and legal high ground. "We document everything," Caleb said. "Every interaction, every threat, every boundary violation. We build an ironclad case. But we also prepare for the worst. We increase patrols, we stay armed and alert, and we protect each other and what's ours." "What about the dogs?" Samuel asked. Everyone knew about the threat Sykes had made. "They stay with me always, and anyone who comes after them will regret it." The men nodded. They understood. In the wilderness, your word and your ability to back it up were everything. Sykes had made a threat. Now it was about who would blink first. Over the next few days, the tension ratcheted higher. Sykes's men continued working their illegal claim, but Caleb's patrols documented everything, where they were digging, what equipment they had, every movement and conversation. It was clear Sykes was gambling, that the law would be too slow or too weak to stop him. But he didn't know that Caleb had sent a second message to Cord directly, explaining the situation and the threats. And he didn't know that Cord was already on his way with federal marshals, treating this as a test case for property rights in the territory. The confrontation was coming. Everyone could feel it. The only question was whether it would end in a courtroom or in bloodshed. Caleb hoped for the former, but prepared for the latter. Because he'd lost too much in his life to let men like Sykes take what mattered now, the land, the life he'd built, the trust he'd learned to give again. And most of all, the 2 dogs who'd led him back from isolation into connection, who'd shown him that saving something meant letting it save you back. He'd protect all of it, whatever it took. The storm was coming. This time, he was ready. The aftermath of Sykes's arrest brought an unexpected quiet to the mountain. Cord and his deputies spent 2 days documenting the illegal mining operation, cataloging equipment and evidence. Sykes and his men were taken to the territorial capital for trial, and the word spread fast. Morrison's land was protected by law, and he had the backing to enforce it. But with that protection came a tension Caleb hadn't anticipated. 3 days after Sykes was arrested, a well-dressed man arrived at the cabin with an offer. His name was Harrison, and he represented a legitimate mining concern out of Denver. They wanted to lease Caleb's land, work the silver properly, legally. The terms were generous: 60% of the profits, full operational control retained by Caleb, guaranteed employment for any men he chose to hire. "You'd be a wealthy man, Mr. Morrison," Harrison said, sitting at the same table where Ashford had made his threats. "This deposit could produce for 20 years or more. You could have anything you wanted." Caleb listened, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, to the mountains beyond. Dakota was outside with Samuel, running a patrol. Birch was asleep by the fire, her paws twitching in some dream. "I need time to think about it," Caleb said. "Of course, but don't take too long. Other mining companies will make offers too, and not all of them will be as ethical as ours." After Harrison left, Caleb sat alone with his thoughts. Wealth, security, the ability to do anything, go anywhere. It was tempting, more than tempting, but something held him back. That evening, his men gathered for supper, a tradition they'd fallen into over the past weeks. Martha had sent up a haunch of venison, and Thomas had made bread that was only slightly burned. They ate together, talking about the day, about nothing in particular. "You going to take the mining offer?" Jack asked finally. "Don't know yet." "It's good money," Samuel pointed out, "more than any of us will see otherwise." "Money isn't everything," Henrik said quietly. "Sometimes a man has to decide what kind of life he wants, rich and complicated, or simple and free." Caleb thought about that as he lay awake that night, Birch curled at his feet, Dakota's breathing steady from his position by the door. 5 years ago, he'd come to these mountains to escape, to disappear, to live simply and alone. The dogs had changed that. They'd brought people back into his life, first the confrontation with Ashford, then Henrik and his crew, then Cord and the law itself. He wasn't alone anymore. He was connected, responsible, part of something. Was that good or bad? He thought about the men he'd lost in the war, the ones whose names were scratched into his brass compass. They'd died for something, for the Union, for freedom, for ideals larger than themselves. At the time, Caleb had believed in those ideals completely. Then the corruption, the false accusations, the betrayal had stripped that belief away. He'd stopped thinking anything was worth fighting for except survival. But these past weeks had shown him something different. There were still things worth protecting, not abstract ideals, but concrete realities. Good land, honest work, people you could count on. Dogs who chose you, even when you didn't think you deserved choosing. Maybe that was enough. Maybe you didn't need grand causes. Maybe you just needed to do right by what was in front of you. The next morning, Caleb called his men together. "I've decided about the mining," he said. "We're not leasing to Harrison's company. Not to anyone." There was silence. Samuel spoke first. "You're turning down a fortune. I'm keeping my land the way it is. The silver can stay in the ground. If I need money, I'll work for it, same as always, trapping, trading, honest labor." "But why?" Thomas asked, genuinely confused. "Because opening a mine means bringing in hundreds of people. It means turning this mountain into an operation, an industry. It means noise and waste and all the complications that come with wealth." Caleb looked around at them. "I came up here to find peace. I found it. Why would I trade that for money I don't need?" Henrik smiled slowly. "Ja, this is wisdom. Some might say it's foolishness," Jack pointed out, "leaving that much wealth in the ground. Then I'm a fool. But I'm a free fool, living the way I choose." Caleb paused. "That said, I'm going to file a proper mining claim on the land anyway, not to work it, but to protect it, make it legally impossible for anyone else to touch it. The silver stays underground, the land stays wild. And us? Samuel asked. You still need us? More than ever. Because once word gets out I'm sitting on a fortune and not touching it, people will think I'm crazy. Some will try to take it by force, others by legal maneuvers. I'll need good men to help protect this place, to keep it the way it should be. That's asking us to turn down wealth too, Thomas said. I am. I'll pay you fair wages from my trapping income, give you homes here if you want them, but it won't be riches. It'll be honest work and a good life in the mountains. If that's not enough, I understand. No hard feelings to any man who wants to leave. The men looked at each other. It was Jack who spoke first. I came west looking for something worth doing, something that mattered. He met Caleb's eyes. I think I found it. I'm staying. Me too, Samuel said. Had enough of chasing money in my life. This is better. Thomas nodded. Where else am I going to get bread this good? He grinned. Besides, someone has to keep you old soldiers from getting too serious. Henrik just smiled. I never left, my friend. This is home. Caleb felt something tight in his chest loosen. These men understood. They got it. Then it settled. We protect the land, live simple, and tell the mining companies to look elsewhere. He paused. And we do one more thing. We make this place a refuge for others like us men who need a fresh start, who want to live honest and free. There's more than enough land for a small community, done right. A settlement? Samuel asked. Not exactly. More like a place where people can catch their breath, build a life away from all the chaos. We've got the space, we've got the resources. Why not use them to help others, the way this place helped me? It was a bigger vision than Caleb had allowed himself in years. Not wealth, but purpose. Not power, but community. Building something that mattered in a way that didn't require compromise or corruption. That, Henrik said, is what I call using wealth properly. The wealth of land, of freedom, of choice. Over the next weeks, they began putting the plan into action. Caleb filed the protective mining claim, making it legally impossible for anyone to work the silver without his permission. Permission he had no intention of giving. He sent word to Harrison and the other mining companies that the land was not available, not now, not ever. The refusals shocked some, angered others, but Caleb held firm. He also started putting out word through Martha and the trading network there was land available in the high country for men who wanted to work it honestly, who were willing to be part of a community built on trust and mutual support. The response surprised him. Within a month, 3 families had arrived, former soldiers and their wives, people tired of the chaos of the frontier towns, looking for something quieter and better. Caleb helped them stake claims on the edges of his property, taught them what he'd learned about surviving in the high country. A small settlement began to take shape, not a mining camp or a railroad town, but something gentler, a place built on the idea that there were more important things than striking it rich. The dogs, as always, were at the center of it. Dakota and Birch became the settlement's unofficial greeters, the first friendly faces newcomers would meet. Children who arrived scared and uncertain would find comfort in petting the big, gentle dogs. The animals seemed to understand their role, offering warmth and acceptance to everyone. One evening, watching the smoke rise from a half-dozen cabins scattered through the valley, Caleb reflected on how much had changed. He'd come here to hide, to be alone, to escape from caring about anything. 2 half-frozen dogs had changed all that, leading him back to connection, to community, to purpose. Sometimes the things we save really do save us back. Spring came to the high country 6 months after Caleb found the dogs in the snow. The settlement they'd built, they were calling it Morrison's Ridge now, though Caleb had tried to object, had grown to 8 families and a dozen single men. It wasn't large, and Caleb intended to keep it that way. Quality over quantity, he'd told them. Good people who understood what they were building here. Martha had moved her trading post operation up the mountain, opening a small outpost that served the settlement and passing trappers. Henrik had built himself a cabin near the creek, finally settling into one place after 30 years of wandering. Samuel, Thomas, and Jack had taken claims and were building homes, talking about maybe sending for family if things continued to go well. It wasn't the life Caleb had imagined when he fled to these mountains. But it was better. The legal matters had finally settled too. Ashford had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for extortion and fraud. Sykes got 3 years for attempted assault and illegal mining. Wheeler's entire operation had been dismantled, the fraudulent claims reversed, and legitimate owners restored to their land. Cord had stopped by a month ago with official documents clearing Caleb's name completely, removing any question about his service record or standing. The papers came with a letter from the War Department, signed by some general Caleb had never heard of, thanking him for his service and expressing regret for the injustice he'd suffered. Caleb had filed the letter away without reading it twice. The past was the past. What mattered was now. He stood on the porch of his cabin, expanded now. With an addition Thomas had helped him build, watching Dakota and Birch play with a litter of puppies in the clearing. Birch had found a mate among the settlement dogs, and the puppies were 8 weeks old now, tumbling over each other in the spring grass. The settlement's children loved them, were always coming by to play with the pups and ask when they could take one home. Caleb had already promised several families a dog, had made sure each child understood the responsibility of caring for an animal. Teach them young, he figured. Teach them that when you take something in, you commit to it. You don't abandon it when it becomes inconvenient. Martha appeared from around the corner of the cabin, carrying a basket. Brought you some of those rolls you like. Don't ask what I had to trade for the sugar, but they're worth it. Appreciate it. Caleb took the basket, gestured to the chairs on the porch. Coffee's hot if you want some. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the dogs, watching the settlement going about its business in the valley below. Smoke rose from chimneys. Someone was working a forge. The settlement's first blacksmith had arrived last week. Children's laughter carried on the wind. You did good here, Caleb, Martha said finally. Built something real. We all did. Wasn't just me. It started with you choosing to do the hard thing, the right thing. She sipped her coffee. You know there's been talk, other settlements hearing about this place. People wanting to know if there's room for more. There's not. We're at capacity. I know. Just thought you should be aware the word is spreading. What you built here, it means something to people. The idea that you can have a community not based on getting rich, but on living well. Caleb thought about that. He'd never intended to start a movement or prove a point. He just wanted to protect what mattered and live according to principles that wouldn't shame the men whose names were on his compass. Tell people they're welcome to build something similar somewhere else. We'll help how we can, share what we learned. But Morrison's Ridge stays small. That's how it works. Martha nodded, unsurprised. She'd expected that answer. Henrik came up the trail, Dakota immediately bounding over to greet him. The old Norwegian scratched the dog's ears and joined them on the porch. The new family settling in all right? Caleb asked. Ja. Good people. The father was a carpenter, he'll be useful. The mother is a teacher. She's already talking about starting a school for the children. A school. Caleb hadn't thought that far ahead, but it made sense. If families were going to stay, raise children here, they'd need education. She'll need a building. The men are already planning it. Should be ready by fall. Henrik accepted coffee from Martha. You know what this means, don't you? Once you have a school, you have permanence. This isn't just a settlement anymore. It's becoming a town. Not a town, Caleb corrected. A community. There's a difference. What's the difference? Martha asked, genuinely curious. Caleb considered his words carefully. A town grows for the sake of growing, attracts whoever shows up, good or bad. A community is intentional. It's about the people you choose to be around, the values you share, the way you treat each other. That's what we have here. That's what we're protecting. And if it grows beyond your control, then we've failed. But I don't think we will. As long as we're careful about who we bring in, as long as we remember why we built this place, we'll be fine. They sat in silence, watching the valley. Birch brought one of her puppies over, dropped it in Caleb's lap. The puppy immediately curled up and fell asleep, warm and trusting. Caleb stroked its soft fur, thinking about the journey that had led here, how 2 dying dogs in a snowstorm had become the catalyst for everything, how saving them had somehow saved him, pulled him out of isolation and back into connection with the world. He thought about Ashford's threats, Sykes's violence, all the men who'd tried to take what wasn't theirs. They'd all lost. Not because Caleb was stronger or richer, but because he'd been willing to trust in good people, trust in the law working properly, trust that doing the right thing mattered. That trust had been rewarded. You ever regret it? Martha asked quietly. Turning down all that wealth? Caleb looked around at his modest but comfortable cabin, at the community in the valley, at the dogs playing in the grass, at the mountains rising eternal in the distance. Not even once. The puppy in his lap stirred, made a small sound, settled deeper against him. The spring sun was warm, the air smelled of pine and grass, and in the distance he could hear children laughing. This was wealth, the kind that mattered. You know, Henrik said. I've been thinking. These puppies, we should train them the way you trained Dakota and Birch. Make sure every family has a good dog, properly trained. It builds bonds, teaches responsibility. That's a good idea. You could do it. You're good with dogs, good with teaching. Could be your contribution, beyond everything else you do. Caleb smiled slightly. I'll think about it. But he already knew he'd do it. Because teaching people, especially young people, how to care for something, how to build trust and loyalty, that was valuable. That was passing on something that mattered. The sun moved higher. Martha eventually excused herself to get back to her store. Henrik wandered down to check on the new family. Caleb stayed on the porch with the sleeping puppy, Dakota and Birch eventually joining him, the 3 dogs and 1 man resting in the warm afternoon. He pulled out the brass compass from his pocket, looked at the names scratched into the metal. James Whitmore, Robert Chen, Samuel Drake, good men who'd believed in something, who'd given everything for what they thought was right. For years, Caleb had thought their sacrifice was wasted, that the corruption and injustice he'd witnessed had poisoned everything they'd died for. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the point wasn't that the system was perfect. The point was that good people kept trying, kept fighting to make things right, kept building communities based on honor and trust and mutual care. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. He put the compass away and sat back, hand resting on Dakota's head. The dog's tail thumped contentedly against the porch. In the valley below, someone started singing a hymn, old and familiar. Others joined in, voices blending in simple harmony. It was Sunday, Caleb realized. The settlement had started gathering for Sunday suppers, everyone contributing food, eating together, sharing the week's news and stories. He should probably go down, join them. That was part of being in community, showing up, being present, contributing. But for now, he just sat, listening to the voices carry up the mountain, feeling the sun on his face and the warm weight of dogs who'd chosen him and a life he'd built from the ashes of who he used to be. Sometimes the things we save end up saving us right back. Caleb had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. But he'd learned it true, and now, watching his community grow and thrive, building something good in the wild places, he knew one thing for certain. He was home. Not the home he'd left behind when he fled 5 years ago. Not the home of his childhood or his military service or any of his past lives. But home nonetheless. built on trust, protected by honor, sustained by the simple commitment to do right by what mattered. The dogs beside him, the people in the valley below, the mountains standing eternal watch. This was enough. This was everything. The puppy stirred and woke, looked up at him with trusting eyes. Caleb scratched behind its ears and the puppy's tail wagged, that pure, uncomplicated joy that animals gave so freely. "Come on," Caleb said to the dogs, standing. "Let's go down to supper. Community doesn't build itself." Dakota and Birch stood with him, ready as always. The puppy followed, tumbling after them on unsteady legs. Together, they walked down the mountain toward the sound of voices and laughter, toward the life Caleb had never planned but had built anyway, step by step, choice by choice, beginning with the decision to save 2 dying dogs in a blizzard. The best decision he'd ever made. The sun set golden over Morrison's Ridge, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. In the valley, the community gathered, and a mountain man who'd spent 5 years in hiding found his place among them. Not alone anymore. Never alone again.